Welcome to the 2021 North Sound Stewards Kickoff meeting. There was a little snafu with the recording, so we've recorded this little intro to get you guys oriented. We are here tonight with our partners, the Marine Resources Committee and Resources. So without further ado, Destiny is going to introduce you guys to the Olympia Oyster Restoration Project as we go through each of the North Sound Stewards projects.
Restoration. And that's going to be Chris and Paul.
Oh, Chris.
Hi there. I just got unmuted here. I'm Chris Brown. I'm a former member of the Marine Resources Committee, and I took the lead along with Austin Rose and others with the restoration of the Olympia oyster in Chuckanut Bay. Olympia oyster, you can do this first slide, Destiny. There we go. We obtained the Olympia oyster, by the way, is virtually the only native oyster we have here in the Pacific Northwest and down the West Coast. These big oysters you see in the pictures, there are actually shells of the non-native Pacific oyster, which has taken over the market in terms of as a food source. So we just decided to take a look at Chuckanut Bay, which the north end of Chuckanut Bay, very shallow, a lot of mudflat exposure there. We call it Mud Bay. There has been archaeological prehistoric evidence actually along the shore of Mud Bay with the presence of Olympia oyster. And, excuse me, and the idea was to put some oysters out on the mudflats, and they will help maybe in a larger population would help filter the water and maybe clean the water. There is some fecal coli and other sources of bad water out there. So we obtained 38 or so bags, net bags of this large clean oyster culch, they call it, and they with spat, which with baby Olympia oysters attached to them, and we were able to obtain those. We set up 7 plots across the northern part of Chuckanut Bay, and we put these shells with the Olympia oyster spat on them out there, and we did that pretty much 4 years ago. So we, in an effort to see if we could reestablish the population out there. We did this with the help of Bellingham Technical College students, MRC members, resource person people, and friends. And in those, in the past 3 years, we've gone out and surveyed and monitored them once a year. And we kept 1 plot of the 7 without any, without.
You don't like the
sort
Tim's chips?
And so that's pretty much the process. And we're monitoring to see if they're still alive or if they are dead, and if they are spreading, if they've been breeding at all. So we've done it each year. And this past summer we did it. And so I will turn it over now to Paul Troutman, who is a current MRC member, and he's sort of taken over the lead from me on this project. Could we have a next picture, Destiny? Just to show you the size of the native oyster here on the left is one of the larger Pacific oyster shells, and these 3 smaller oysters, they're about the size of a silver dollar, if anybody knows what a silver dollar looks like. They're not very big, nothing compared to the Pacific oyster. And so that's an example of them having grown on the Pacific oyster. The right side image there has students and helpers who are monitoring. They're doing quadrats monitoring. They're counting to see how many oysters are in there. Are they alive? Are they dead? That sort of thing. And so I'm going to turn it over now to Paul, and he can talk about what happened last year and what the plans are for this coming season.
Thanks, Chris. So we went out this past summer and visited all the different sites that there were 7 different sites in Chuckanut Bay. And so we went out and monitored all of those sites and measured the different oysters that we found. Some of the sites were productive, some of them were not so productive. We have since come to learn that probably part of the problem that we are experiencing is that we don't have enough substrate for the Olympia oysters to take hold onto. So I think in the future, we're going to focus on trying to get some more substrates, get some more culture out there so that we can hopefully get these oysters to expand their production, and we'll see what happens. We were encouraged at one of the sites. A couple of the other sites weren't so good, but we have since learned from other MRCs that have been working to restore Olympia oysters that maybe part of our problem is that we just don't have enough substrate. So hopefully we will have some money budgeted this summer, and we'll be able to get some more culture put out there and move this project forward.
And by substrate, briefly, that just means more shells, more bare culch shells out there. And we invite new North Sound stewards to participate this summer and in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll be doing probably sometime at a low tide, probably next July or August. We'll be out there visiting the sites again, and hopefully, like I said, we'll have some more substrate to distribute on the plots, and then it'll take another year before we'll actually see if that was an effective thing, and if we're getting more of an established population there.
All right, thank you both. So now we're going to hear from Austin, and she's going to talk about Chuckanut Pick.
Hi, so I am Austin Rose. I work with Whatcom County Public Works, and I staff the Whatcom Marine Resources Committee. And the Chuckanut Pollution Identification and Control Program, otherwise known as Chuckanut Pick, that's a water quality project that the MRC also runs in this North Chuckanut Bay area that was just described. So this area is actually a recreational shellfish harvesting area, and it supports many species of clams. However, there's been concerns over bacteria levels in northern Chuckanut Bay for 20 plus years. So the Washington Department of Health, they closed the area to shellfish harvesting due to poor water quality, particularly evident through fecal coliform bacteria around the mid-90s. And the MRC continued to help with some water quality sampling in the freshwater area through the late 90s and early 2000s. And in 2014, the MRC decided to expand the project in both the marine and the freshwater, so helping with water quality sampling in both marine and freshwater, again, looking at fecal coliform analysis. And they created this project, the Pollution Identification and Control, which actually contributes to the wider Whatcom County PIC program. And so the MRC does a lot of ongoing community outreach and engagement on best management practices for healthy water quality and recruits community volunteers to help with sampling. I'm just noticing, Destiny, you didn't put forward my slides, but that's okay. So that's another view of North Chuckanut Bay. And there are the sampling sites. So all those blue dots that I hope you can see there, those are the marine sampling sites, and all the yellow dots represent the freshwater sites. So sampling takes about an hour. I organize 2 teams, a marine sampling team and a freshwater team, to go and start sampling at the same time. And about an hour later, they meet back at the entrance to the beach at North Chuckanut Bay. Next slide. So even though this is a pretty confined bay, we do look for kayakers that can provide their own kayaking gear and do have some kayaking experience to help with the marine sampling. the sampling is just a basic water grab, and all those samples get transferred to an ecology certified lab called Exact Labs, and that's in Ferndale, Washington. But usually Whatcom County staff take the samples to the lab for us. So. Oh, and then I'm also talking about another project that the MRC does. It's monitoring floating bull kelp. So the MRC, you can go to the next slide, please. Thanks. So the MRC works in collaboration with the Northwest Straits Initiative, which was described earlier in this presentation. And they use existing kayak-based monitoring protocols to monitor floating bull kelp beds at 5 different locations in Whatcom County to provide information on their status. So looking at the presence, size, and health of these kelp beds. So they currently sample on Southwest Lummi Island, the Easton Preserve, which is also on Lummi Island, but on the other side of the island, Cherry Point Gulf Road, and Alden Bank. And we also, or the MRC also samples at Point Whitehorn. So this data really supports a larger regional kelp monitoring program to provide a better understanding of kelp distribution, bed size, kelp speciation, and overall bull kelp health in the Salish Sea. So volunteers go out in teams and they take a GPS unit and track the perimeter of kelp beds while also noting additional observations like the health of the kelp, the depth, temperature, and other observations like any kind of critters that are utilizing the kelp or any kind of fish activity in the area. So the perimeter is mapped, as you can see with those 2 maps on the left-hand side of the slide. And we put them online on a mapping platform called Sound IQ, which we can show you more about that if you're interested. So again, this is kayaking in a little bit more open water, even though it is close to the shoreline. The surveys are done July through September of every year. And again, we ask people that have bring their own kayaking gear and have kayaking experience in order to participate in these surveys. That's it.
Unmuting there. Okay, thank you, Austin. And now we're going to hear from Maya on forage fish monitoring.
All right. Hello, everyone. It's so great that everyone can make it tonight. My name is Maya, and I'm the Whatcom MRC's Forage Fish intern. So I'm actually running these survey programs. If it's something you're interested in doing, I'm the one that you're going to do it with. So we partner with Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife to try and quantify. There you go. To try and quantify forage fish populations here in Puget Sound. Forage fish are a super important source of food for many larger organisms in the Sound. One of the biggest predators of forage fish are actually seabirds and migratory birds. By understanding these forage fish populations, we can also have a better insight into overall ecosystem health here in the Puget Sound. This data set is actually really cool and something that I really enjoy being a part of because they started collecting this data set back in the late 80s, early 90s. And it's always really powerful to have a long-term data set like this available to researchers. We can see how things change over time. You can also see if like Little Squalicum Park we're looking at, which is one of our sites, has had some restoration. So to have really robust data is a really powerful tool. So we're doing good things by collecting this data. To collect this data, we go out on the beaches. You can actually go back one, sorry, thank you. We go out on the beaches here in Bellingham. We're doing Marine Park and Little Squalicum Estuary, but we go out on the beach, we collect substrate, sand, gravel from the beach. We're just on the beach, we're not going in the water. And it gets sieved through a couple different size sieves, and then we agitate it in moving water. There's a whole blue bowl method that we do. And that moving water actually helps to lift any of the less dense material, which are eggs, hopefully, of the forage fish that we're looking for, gets lifted out, and we can put them into a separate jar with a fixative that then ultimately gets sent down to the Washington Department Fish and Wildlife's lab in Olympia, where they can determine presence, absence, and then abundance of eggs in each sample that we collect. Again, our sites here in Bellingham are Marine Park and Little Squalicum Estuary. You can move to the next one now. There we go. If you'd like to participate in this survey, we would be super happy to have you involved. There's no need to worry about any prior training. I'll walk you through everything we need to know on the beach. You don't need any special gear, just some sturdy shoes to walk around on, and some nice weather appropriate clothing. With the tides in the winter, sometimes we've had to work a little bit later into the evening, so sometimes a headlamp is helpful. But once you get on the mailing list, all that information will be in the mailing list will be in the email each month. Headlamps, yeah. So the survey takes from start to finish about 2 hours, where we'll meet at the beach and then we'll move to resources, which is also the restore location, to process the samples that we collect at Little Squalicum and Marine Park. If you want to participate, super excited to have you. You can get information by adding your email to the Forage Fish survey list, which will be going around after this event, I believe. I'm sure Destiny will send it around. And please make sure you respond to that email each month that I send it out so that I can track the number of people coming out to work on this survey. That's super important, especially during COVID, because I can only have a certain number of people out at the same time. But I am hoping everyone can get out to at least one or two. And we'll keep everyone updated on COVID restrictions. And I believe that goes for all of these events, but I'm sure that people will talk about that later. Anyways, I look forward to meeting you all, and thank you all for volunteering.
Yes, thank you, Maya. Okay, and now we're going to hear from Alex again, and he's going to discuss European green crab.
Yeah, here I am, getting set up. So European green crab, this is Alex. I'm that volunteer from the MRC again. This project is a cooperative effort with the Washington Sea Grant crab team at the University of Washington. Washington Sea Grant coordinates 50 crab monitoring sites throughout the US part of the Salish Sea. Here in Whatcom County, we manage 3 sites. At all of these sites, we set traps and try to catch European green crab. Next slide, please. This is an adult European green crab. They've already invaded areas around the globe, and they have been found to be very destructive to the ecosystems that they invade. They spread easily and multiply quickly. European green crab are accidentally introduced, or they were accidentally introduced into San Francisco Bay about 30 years ago, and now they've spread all the way up the coast to southern British Columbia. Here in the Salish Sea, they could threaten our Dungeness crabs, oysters, and clams. Now, there are 2 opportunities for you as a North Sound steward: eyes on the beach and boots in the mud. For eyes on the beach, you just have to learn how to identify European green crab and how to report one if you find it. Next slide, please. Now, the other type of activity that you can get involved in is what we call boots in the mud. And there are 2 different types of boots in the mud events. One is the early detection. That's the 50 sites that I told you about, where we set the traps and look for crabs. At each one of these sites, once a month, from April through September, volunteers set traps on one day and then go back the next day to see what we caught and to record data. It takes about 2 hours each day. Now, the other boots in the mud experience is what we call rapid response. So when a European green crab is found, then we have this big event where we set out 50 to 100 traps all around in that area and try to catch them and get more information about the infestation there. Both of these, the boots in the mud and the rapid response and the early detection, both require training that will take several hours. And this year, that'll be an online training due to COVID restrictions. It'll probably happen in March. Now, the 50 teams of the early detection part are regrouping now. So soon we will know how many new team members are needed. We'll keep you informed via the monthly e-newsletter and the North Sound Stewards Crab Team email list. So that's 2 ways you can follow it. Next slide, please. Now, this is the same bay that you saw when Austin was talking about the Chuckanut Pick program. You can see the early detection site is that big white pin on the left-hand side there, on the train trestle. So we walked from the public access site at the end of Fairhaven Avenue. That's the green pin with the little tree on it that's labeled Chuckanut Pocket Estuary. And we walk along the shoreline there across the top part of the bay. You can see the 2 light colored yellow dots that are along the shoreline there. Volunteers found European green crab molts there. That's an example of eyes on the beach. Walking out on the beach, seeing a molt and reporting it. Now on the other side of the bay, that darker yellow dot at the Woodstock Farm, that's where 3 European green crabs were found in a rapid response training event. Next slide, please. This is me helping the Macaw tribe monitoring and trapping European green crab just south of Cape Flattery on the Washington Ocean coast. Since starting with green crab team about 3 years ago, I have handled about 50 European green crabs. I've had a lot of fun and I've found tremendous fulfillment helping and working with scientists and visiting coastal areas that I otherwise never would have seen. Now Rondi is going to tell you about the intertidal monitoring.
Hi everyone, I'm Rondi. I use she, hers pronouns, and I'm the AmeriCorps Serving with Resources as the Aquatic Reserves Stewardship and Monitoring Coordinator. We can move to the next slide. So right now we're kind of unsure about what we're going to be doing for intertidal monitoring and training, but we'll keep you updated as soon as we know more. Training typically happens in late spring and monitoring between May and August. There are 4 sites for each of the local aquatic reserves, Fidalgo Bay and Cherry Point, with 2 more with Northwest Straits Foundation. At each reserve, 2 sites are monitored per year with them alternating every couple years. So for example, if we have sites labeled A, B, C, and D, A and B would be sampled different years than C and D. We can move to the next slide. So when conducting surveys, we collect information on 3 different things: beach slope using elevation profiles, species abundance through quadrat counts, and species swaths with lead naturalists. Some tasks that can be fulfilled by all y'all include recording data, species identification, elevation profiling, and taking photos. Lead naturalists will be available for help as needed, especially with species ID, which can be tricky sometimes. There's no particular gear that's required. We'll provide pretty much anything that's really required, such as like the transect lines and the quadrats. But we just ask that you come ready to be out on the beach for most of the day. Some things that we would recommend bringing or wearing would be beach shoes, hats, and sunscreen. And that's all I got for this.
All right, thank you, Rondi. And now we're going to move on to the resources and aquatic reserves projects. And we're going to hear from Eleanor on plastics monitoring.
Hi folks, I'm Eleanor Hines, North Sound Beekeeper Lead Scientist with Resources. I'm also the chair on the Whatcom Marine Resources Committee, and it's wonderful to see a mixture of new as well as familiar faces tonight. So thanks for joining us. So with plastics, we have a number of different ways that we monitor for plastics with a number of different partners. Next slide, please. So it's really great to get out there on the beach and clean up plastics, but it's also great to collect data on the plastics that are out there so that we can better figure out how to address the growing problem with plastics. For example, if we're finding a whole bunch of bottle caps out on the beach, maybe there's some policy that could be implemented, such as like bottle cap leashes that mean that the bottle caps don't get separated from the bottle, so the whole thing goes into recycling, or something like that, just as one example. Next slide, please. So some of the ways that you guys can help us monitor plastics is through the, I'm sorry, this slide did not update the way it was supposed to. So one of the ways that you guys can get involved is with the COAST program. They offer a training. Last year, unfortunately, we had to cancel it because it was scheduled for March and then COVID struck, but we're hoping this year we might be able to get some virtual trainings in. In the COAST program, you adopt your own beach, and then after that, you go out on a monthly basis and you sample for plastics. And then, and actually the COAST program, just real quick, we do have a returning North Sound Steward on here who participated in the COAST program. And because she was participating in the COAST program, she actually found a crab molt because she was also part of the green crab team monitoring for the invasive there. And she found it while she was out doing survey and went, this doesn't look right. And notified the right people. And that's really how we discovered that there was such a problem in Drayton Harbor with green crab. So it's really great that you guys are getting involved with multiple community science programs, because then you might make some unexpected discoveries like that. There's also the EPA Escaped Assessment Trash Protocols, or ETAP for short, which is showed in the picture there, where it's a little bit more painstaking, but it's really valuable data where you sort out all of you go out, do a cleanup, and then you sort out all the garbage. And there are potential implications for that to set regulatory standards on plastics, which is a great way to also help manage the growing problem of plastics in our marine environment. We also have a cigarette butts program too that you can participate in, where you basically go out and you count how many cigarette butts there are in a certain area, and then we can look into potential, if you identify a hotspot, then we can try to work with you to find things like cigarette butt canisters or other solutions, and then monitor to see its overall effectiveness. And for those of you who don't know, because I've known this for a while, but I recognize not everyone, I was surprised when I first found out cigarette butts are actually considered marine plastic debris, because they are plastic. We also would love to offer monthly beach cleanups, but due to COVID, we're not doing those monthly beach cleanups like we had planned at the beginning of last year. However, there will still be some beach cleanups throughout the year. And we also highly encourage folks to go out and do solo cleanups whenever they can. And when you do solo cleanups, you can use the Ocean Conservancy's Clean Swell app, as well as the NOAA Marine Debris Tracker app, or not as well, either or, to help track what you're finding while you're out there. And you can do this on your own. You can, following the current COVID guidelines from the state, you can, maybe find a buddy who wants to go out with you, and maybe you can, somewhere where you walk every week. It doesn't have to be a shoreline. It could also be, your back alleyway, or the walk you do with your dog every morning, or something like that, and just pick up whatever you see. So those are some of the ways that you can get involved with plastics. And next up, Alex will talk about C-Star monitoring.
C-Star monitoring, that's my turn. This is Alex again. Our C-Star monitoring program supports a collaboration of scientists from many organizations that you can see listed here. We monitor in Whatcom County, but we share our data with others all up and down the Pacific coast, from Alaska to Mexico. Next slide, please. Now, this photo shows a healthy piesaster, also known as a purple sea star, or several of them that were found at Cherry Point during one of our surveys in January in 2019. We survey 2 times each year, once in the summer and once in the winter at low tide, at Cherry Point and at Clayton Beach. We do the summer surveys at the same time that we do the intertidal surveys that were described earlier by Rondi. Our winter surveys take place at night because low tides in the winter are at night. So to participate in this program, you'll have to visit a beach once in the summer during the day and once in the winter at night. It takes about 2 hours. We identify sea stars, we count them, measure, and photograph them. We also record the presence and absence of sea star wasting syndrome. For this project, you can stay on the previous slide for just a minute. For this project, we also have the eyes on the beach option. All you have to do is visit a beach that you love, that has sea stars at low tide, and report on when and where you see the sea stars and where they are healthy or showing signs of disease. All right, now let's take a look at the 6 sea stars on the next slide. The sea star on the right is sick with sea star wasting disease. You can see that it's discolored, it's lost one of its rays. Now the sea star on the left is dead, it's almost completely dissolved. Sea star wasting syndrome can kill a sea star in just a few days. It used to be seen in small areas. We've seen it since 1970s, and it would be in a small area, last about a year, and then go away. But then 7 years ago, it struck the entire Pacific coast all at the same time, from Mexico to Alaska, completely wiping out some species in some areas. And other species, not so much. There were a few species that were unaffected. Some sites and species are showing signs of recovery. Others are not. Next slide, please. This is a healthy Pycnopodia, or sunflower star. It's a species that was particularly hard hit by sea star wasting syndrome. Scientists still don't fully understand what causes sea star wasting disease. Apparently, it's not a bacteria, but they have found a virus and sometimes a fungus that has been associated with it in some cases, but not in others. The data that we're collecting is extremely important to understand the patterns and to assess how populations are recovering. Now, here's Rondi again to tell you about marine bird monitoring.
I want to start off the marine bird section by saying that I'm not much of a birder, but I've really enjoyed going out the last couple months for the surveys that I've attended. I've learned so much and had so much fun. So if anyone needs convincing on attending bird monitoring, I can do that. Next slide. So there are 3 roles with the bird surveys. A counter who's a trained birder who uses a scope and binoculars to count and identify birds, a spotter who helps the counter find birds, and a scribe who records everything down in a data sheet. Usually there are 2 teams at each survey, but we also have had to make do with 2 counters and 1 recorder before. It all kind of just depends on COVID restrictions. Surveys occur monthly between September and May at both Fidalgo Bay and Cherry Point aquatic reserves. This range helps us capture both migratory and more resident bird species. Surveys generally take about 2 hours, but they can go a little longer depending on how many birds we actually see out there. Next slide, yeah. So these are 2 of the most common species we see at both reserves. Buffleheads are especially common at Fidalgo Bay. In the 2019 season, they made up about 50% of all of the birds counted, which is a lot. These surveys are really important for tracking bird abundance in the region and to have baseline data in the event of any kind of disaster, as well as for tracking species decline. Participation at Fidalgo Bay is pretty limited right now due to a lack of parking space. But as long as COVID restrictions allow, there's more opportunities at Cherry Point right now. And no specific gear is required as long as, or no specific gear is required, but a scope and pair of binoculars are really nice to have. And if you want to be trained up for being a spotter or a counter, we'll let you know what training looks like. And we can also provide some gear ourselves at resources. Yeah, hope you find these birds interesting and sign up.
Thank you, Rondi. Okay, and now we're going to move on to Eleanor again, and she's going to talk about ocean acidification monitoring.
So we do ocean acidification monitoring with the Washington Department of Natural Resources, a nearshore monitoring network, also known as Anemone program, where we help facilitate their efforts on the local level. So they have about 10 sites throughout the state, and their staff are based in Olympia. And so it's hard for them to get out to all of those sites scattered throughout the state. So it's really nice to have the support of local community science volunteers like you guys that can help fill in. So next slide. So during the summer season, it's a little bit busier. We found that there's well, if you know anything about biology here in the Pacific Northwest, there's a lot more growth in the summertime. And so DNR got a little frustrated at some of their sites that they weren't able to get out to, because after 3 months, they realized that they were measuring the water chemistry of the inside of a barnacle. So having volunteers get out every other week during the summer, during the low tide cycles, to clean the sensors that measure the water quality, or measure the water chemistry is super, super helpful for them. It really enhances the data that they're able to collect. That is a lot more accurate. So we clean, or sometimes we swap the sensors so that they can get the data back and read it. We also will count and measure the eelgrass that's out there, because we're looking at the differences in pH between eelgrass beds versus non-eelgrass bed areas. And then we also look at spat tiles as well, and swapping those out, which are an indicator of how well shelled organisms like barnacles and oysters can grow given the pH that's going on in that environment. And next slide. And then in the off season, we don't have to go as often, because we don't have as many sunny days and it's not as warm. So there's not as much growth that happens, but there is still some growth. So we go out and still clean the sensors when we can, as well as help swap out the sensors too. And so items that are needed for this activity, this is a photo of Fidalgo Bay. And so hip or chest waders are definitely recommended. The tide just doesn't get low enough in that area. However, at Cherry Point, as you saw maybe in the previous photo, things like rain boots work perfectly well for the most part, because the tide does get out far enough. And I think that's all I have for ocean acidification.
All right, thank you, Eleanor. Okay, and now we're going to go over, I'm going to really briefly go over some other ways to get involved with North Sound Stewards. Oh, there we go. Okay, so we have a number of smartphone apps. We have Water Reporter, which I believe was put together by Resources Pollution Prevention Specialist, Kirsten McDade. She put that together. And there's also My Coast and CleanSwell, and these are pollution tracking apps. So you can snap a photo of any marine debris that you see. You can record king tides and things like that. So if there are any, if there's ever any lag, if there's ever any like, oh, there's no trainings going on, there's no learning opportunities going on, how can I get involved? How can I get those hours? This is a really good way. You can just go out on your own. You can go out in your little COVID bubble and take a walk on the beach. And if you see any debris, you can just snap a photo. So it's nice and simple. And then we also have water quality testing. So Surfrider has a Blue Water Task Force and Ecology Beach program. So if you're interested in water quality testing, you can do that. It looks like they need 2 to 3 volunteers to sample weekly from May through August, and they could use a few for Surfrider's Blue Water Task Force right away to sample monthly. So mainly through May and August. And then we have volunteering for education and outreach. Now, under ordinary circumstances, we would go out like during Sea to Ski or things like that, and go out to events and have tables up and let people know like, oh, this is North Sound Stewards, this is what we're about. It's not the case, clearly, with COVID. So we will see how things pan out across the rest of the year. And if those opportunities arise, if we can do that in person, that'd be awesome. But if you want to help out with that, you can. And then we have our skill building and learning events. So if you've done North Sound Stewards before, these are things like the North Sound Steward Speaker Series. This is the MRC and WEN Speaker Series. And it's just a way to learn new skills and learn about the Salish Sea Yeah. And now we're going to hear from MK, and she's going to give us a little how-to on how to sign up for Track It Forward. Oh, just kidding. So we have some 2019 highlights. This is actually going to be covered in the video as well. But so we have Margaret Santa Maria. I don't know if Margaret's here, but Margaret was actually the one who, I believe that's supposed to say 2020, but Margaret is the one who recorded the most number of hours with 78.5. We logged over 1,500 hours of community science, 40 sites monitored, 119 monitoring events. We cleaned up 2,000 pounds of trash, and we helped inform the kelp conservation and recovery plan. So that is just a little bit of what we were able to accomplish. And now we're going to hear from MK on Track It Forward.
Great. Hi, my name is MK, and I am working with the MRC as their volunteer coordinator intern, and I am here to talk to you about Track It Forward. And I go by she, her pronouns. You could go to the next slide. So Track It Forward is a really cool site to log your hours. All you have to do is go to trackitforward.com. You could also download a mobile app for your phone. It's called Volunteer Time Tracking by Track It Forward. But essentially, you go to trackitforward.com, you sign in, and in order to log your hours, you need to create an account, which you just do by clicking to register, and you fill out the information and select sign up. So when you want to log your hours, you simply add the hours, add the date, list the activity. Sometimes it'll ask you for the verifications and organizer section, but don't worry about that if you don't know that information. And yeah, that's pretty much it. And other than that, yeah, just make sure that you log in your hours whenever you volunteer. Sometimes there will be different training opportunities. So if you do have a training set of hours, just make sure you label that as training as well. But that's all I have for Track It Forward.
Okay, thank you, MK, and thank you to all of our presenters. I know that was a lot of information. If you were sitting there and you're like, oh no, I don't remember anything, that's totally fine. We're gonna send you the pamphlet. We're gonna send you this recording. So no worries. And it is 5:53, so we're gonna take a very brief, just 5-minute break, go eat, use the bathroom and all that, and we will reconvene at, let's do 5:59. 5:59. So I will see you all in 5 minutes. Okay, it is 5:59, so we're gonna go ahead and get started. So now I'm gonna go ahead and show you all a video that was put together by Eleanor Hines, our North Sound Baykeeper. And this is a recap of all of the data you all collected in 2020 if you are a returning North Sound Stewards. So I'm gonna pull that up. And Eleanor or somebody let me know if we're looking good.
The screen is a little cut off.
Screen is a little cut off. Okay, okay. What about, are you seeing the whole?
Yeah.
Okay, give me 1 sec. How's that? Sure, okay, we'll go ahead and run it.
Citizen science activates thousands of people around Puget Sound to engage in research, increasing our collective understanding of the state of our marine environment. North Sound Stewards are vital to the protection of the Salish Sea. Things were a little different in 2020, but let's take a look at the highlights. The Department of Natural Resources Acidification Nearshore Monitoring Network continued their monitoring this summer at Birch Bay State Park around Cherry Point. They look at this data to inform management on how eelgrass might help to reduce impacts of ocean acidification. Sea star wasting syndrome monitoring was also able to happen this year. At Clayton Beach this winter, we had a small handful of volunteers who helped out, who counted numerous healthy sea stars, which is always exciting. We also monitored Neptune Beach this winter, but due to unexpectedly extremely high tides, we ended up doing a time survey instead. At Neptune Beach, we had a small group of volunteers due to COVID who also counted many healthy sea stars. We had 59 Prisaster ocraceus, all reported healthy. All of our data goes into a West Coast database, which you can also check out online. This year, we were only able to conduct one intertidal monitoring event at Intellico. There was a major landslide event at the site, however, we were still able to conduct the surveys. We split our surveys into 2 monitoring dates so that we could get a few more volunteers out, including our 2 lead naturalists. All of our data goes to the Department of Natural Resources, which currently is going to inform the 2020 Management Plan update for Cherry Point. Beach monitoring also happened this summer with the Department of Ecology, where we sampled at Larrabee State Park and Little Squalicum Beach weekly this summer, collecting a total of 124 samples looking at bacteria. Little Squalicum still has a permanent water quality advisory posting, but we hope that with some effort we can change this in the near future. Marine bird monitoring happens September through May of each year at Cherry Point. Let's take a little bit of a closer look at some of the data. There were almost 5,000 birds counted this last season, with 33 species counted, the highest number counted in December, and a total of 250 volunteer hours and a total of 8 surveys completed. The most observed birds were brants and scoters. In the last 3 years, nearly 11,000 birds were counted, with this last year being the highest number of birds counted. European green crab monitoring happened this summer. Only previously trained volunteers unfortunately were able to help out due to COVID. A green crab molt was found at North Chuckanut Bay, and the 100th inland Washington water green crab was found in June at Drayton Harbor, with many more found in the Drayton Harbor area as WDFW launched an emergency response plan. We are pleased to say that some of our volunteers actually found themselves jobs with WDFW, and a previously undocumented non-native shrimp species was found that subsequently was discovered to be present at a lot of other green crab sites. Data goes to the Washington Sea Grant. They coordinate data collection at many other sites throughout Washington state. We continue to work with multi-agency management thanks to our North Sound Steward volunteer who discovered green crabs last year. Beach cleanups happened in 2020, however, not quite as planned, though we still managed to pick up over 1,000 pounds of garbage. And thank you to everyone who also did solo cleanups. You were a big help. Forage fish monitoring happens monthly at Little Squalicum Beach, as well as Marine Park. We sample at Little Squalicum Beach because it's the location of a future restoration project. We are interested to see if there is any change in the pre- and post-restoration of this estuary area. When we go out and collect samples, we collect sediment samples from the beach. We collect sediment samples about every 33 feet at each site on about 100-foot long sections. After these samples are collected, we then head to somewhere with a hose so that we can process the sediment samples. We put them through sieves, and then we use what's called the blue bowl vortex method so that we can sieve out any eggs, and then we send those eggs off to the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. WFW also occasionally will accompany us out in the field to oversee what we're doing. They also collect our data so that they can then look and see what's happening on the statewide scale for forage fish. The Chuckanut Pollution Identification and Control Program also continues. There are 7 sites monitored monthly by kayak, as well as 6 additional upland sites monitored at the same time. Some sampling events had some concerningly high counts of bacteria. However, the overall long-term bacteria meets the criteria for both marine and fresh water. So the Whatcom County Health Department continues to use this data to assess if the bay can be reopened for shellfish harvest in the future. Olympia oyster restoration monitoring happened in August of 2020. Native oysters were released in 2018 to North Chuckanut Bay by the Whatcom Marine Resources Committee. There were larger oysters found in 2020 than in previous years, as well as fewer live oysters in 2020, which also related to fewer dead oysters found in 2020 as well overall. Bull kelp monitoring happened this summer with some exciting paddles. We got out to 4 different sites in 2020. We had data on temperature, as well as depth and bed area collected. Together, volunteers paddled about 75 miles. Well done! Taking a look at some of the data from this past year, at Point Whitehorn Cherry Point, we saw a decrease in the overall acreage mapped. However, at Southwest Lummi Island, Easton Preserve, Cherry Point Gulf Road, we saw an increase in the 2020 data from 2019, which is always great news. And more excitingly, we also observed some kelp crabs, some red rock crabs, healthy sea stars, and lots more other cool critters. And I also want to note that our monitoring helped inform a state plan. The data is shared with the Northwest States Commission, who shares it then with the Department of Natural Resources and others. Be sure to check out SoundIQ for more information. Plus, there were a lot of data collected on smartphone apps this year. A lot happened in 2020, so let's celebrate your successes. You were all still able to get out and fill data gaps, and able to get out into the field even when staff couldn't. And thanks to you, we're still able to protect the Salish Sea.
All right, thank you, Eleanor, for putting that video together. That was an awesome recap of everything you all were able to accomplish in 2020. And that was also just a really good recap of all of the projects in case the first part was really overwhelming. So now we're gonna jump to, oh, give me a minute. We're gonna jump to volunteers of the quarter and highlighting those folks. So give me 1 minute here. And how are we looking? How's this? Are we good? Okay, good. Perfect. Okay, so North Sound Stewards Volunteer of the Quarter is something new that we rolled out this last year. And if you are new to North Sound Stewards, or even if you have been a North Sound Stewards and you haven't been paying close attention to the e-news or our blog posts, you might be like, what the heck is Volunteer of the Quarter? I've never heard about this. So this is something we rolled out this year, and every 3 months, the North Sound Steward Advisory Committee gets together and nominates who they think should be the Volunteer of the Quarter. And the way that they decide that is, one, you have to actively be involved in North Sound Stewards, so you have to be participating, and then you have to stand out in some way. So maybe you got the most volunteer hours that quarter, measured by Track It Forward, or maybe you got some friends together and you're like, oh, let's go and do a beach cleanup, or maybe you found something really cool, but in some way you went above and beyond and you caught the eye of one of the advisory committee members. You demonstrate an overall goodwill towards our community and an eagerness to learn and lend a helping hand. So maybe not only are you doing North Sound Stewards, but we notice that you're doing other things out in the community. We take that into consideration, and we try to consider less traditional North Sound Stewards volunteers. We know that it can be difficult to get out, like maybe you got kids, maybe you have work, you know, you can't always be the person that's going out getting the most hours. So we do try to take that into consideration and make sure that we're being fair in doing that. So we are going to see our volunteers of the quarter. Don't worry. I know that I think we have all of them here. Don't worry. I'm not going to put you on the spot. You don't have to give a speech or anything unless you want to. But we are going to start out with quarter number 1. And that is, sorry, give me one moment. That is going to be, drum roll, Dexter Davis. So Dexter Davis was our volunteer of the quarter for the first quarter. And some of his highlights are that he participated in the Blue Water Task Force, Forage fish monitoring, sea star monitoring, ocean acidification monitoring. So clearly very, very busy, very active. And that quarter, he got the highest number of hours logged and track it forward. So good. This is why you log your hours and track it forward. And he also studies marine science and math at WW. So when you get selected as volunteer of the quarter, you receive an email from me and we interview you and we get some of your pictures and we make a blog post about you on the resources website. So I pulled one of his quotes and it's, "To be a scientist, I don't have to have a degree. I can contribute to science in Washington and pursue information just as an interested person who cares about the outdoors," which really encapsulates the spirit of North Sound Stewards, that you don't have to have a degree, you don't have to be a scientist to go out and collect data. And coincidentally, he does study marine science, so maybe instead of being a volunteer, he will be one of the scientists helping us out in the future. So thank you, Dexter. And then for quarter number 2, oh, just kidding, we have Kristen Wilms. So Kristen, oh, give me one sec. So Kristen volunteered in the beach program. She gathered water samples and recorded temp and salinity and tide information. And the thing that stuck out to our advisory committee was that she was really highly engaged, but she was like super new to the area, really new to the program. And they're like, wow, she really just dived, like she just dove right in. So that's what caught their eye. And she was also in the top 3 for hours logged for the quarter. And the quote I chose from her interview is, "With the climate changing, we'll likely see more issues with water quality and invasive species. So it's essential for communities to continue monitoring our environment and gathering data so we know how to deal with problems when they arise," which I think is super pertinent. So thank you, Kristen. And then for quarter number 3, we have Melanie Connor Lyons. Melanie was also part of the beach sampling program, and she was testing for sewage and bacteria levels in the water. She also clearly helped out with the kayak kelp surveys, and a quote that one of the advisory committee members said was, "She showed a genuine passion and interest in the marine environment and learning more about how to protect it." So that's what stood out about her. And the quote I chose from her is, "It's important to recognize one's own personal responsibility in protecting our water, whether it's cleaning up dog poop so that it doesn't contaminate water, picking up microtrash on beaches, or joining the citizen science program. Everyone has a role to play." So thank you, Melanie. Such great words of wisdom from everybody. This is great. And then our last volunteer of the quarter is Ryan Robbie. So Ryan's highlights were he was one of 2 people to hit and exceed the 50 hours per year goal for this last year. And again, this isn't like a hard, fast goal. This isn't like, oh, if I don't meet this goal, then, whatever. It's just a benchmark. And it's remarkable that he was able to do that during COVID when almost all of our training opportunities were completely obliterated. For a while, things were at a standstill. So yeah, that's incredible. Thank you, Robbie. And he was involved throughout the entire year and consistently made efforts to collect data. So I'm sure that's how he was able to hit those 50 hours. Like I said before, with those apps, with the My Coast and the Water Reporter, if there's ever a lag and you're like, oh, I need something to do, you can go out and like a king tide information, which he was able to do. And then something else, which I believe this is accurate, that he won a statewide volunteer award through AmeriCorps. So contributing to our community in multiple ways. And his quote was, to paraphrase the first part, "When you get involved, you're sending a message that our actions as individuals can help create positive change. Consider reaching out to someone in your circle to discuss what does being a caretaker for nature mean to you." So again, great words of wisdom. Thank you, Robbie. And thank you to all of our volunteers of the quarter. And thank you to all of our volunteers, period. I cannot stress enough that you guys are not getting paid for this. So all of this wonderful work that Eleanor put together in that video, all that data that you were able to collect, the state plan that you guys were able to help inform, like all of that is volunteer work. None of that was paid. None of that was government agencies. That was all you guys. So thank you. And to show a very small token of our appreciation, all of our volunteers of the quarter will be receiving this lovely gift bag here that has some work gloves, reusable straws, hats, hair ties. You get a shirt like so from Resources and a $25 gift card to REI. So in your follow-up email, we will go over instructions for how to collect that. But yes, thank you all so much for that. And that is our volunteers of the quarter. Yay. Okay,